Good. Excellent. Welcome. We are rolling right into another episode of the Nameless Recovery Show. It's to be the first one of the new year, 2021. Welcome. News anchor, journalist, best-selling author.
Thank you.
Brandon Lee.
Yeah, it's good to be here, man. It's good to be here. I always love being on a podcast. As I always say, shooting the shit about recovery.
Right on.
Especially during the holidays, during the new year. 2020 was a mess. Hopefully 2021 will be a lot better.
Crap, what a shit show it's been.
Yeah, it's been tough.
So, first things first, read your book. I say read, I listened to your book, which is cool that you actually did all of the
voice
narrating
track.
yourself.
Yeah,
voice work.
I couldn't imagine, well, first off, I couldn't imagine like writing a book and then have somebody else voice it. Like I felt like,
Sure.
hey, my profession, right? All I do is read for a living, you know, and broadcast. So I was like, no. Of course, I'm gonna read my own book. I know the emotion of it. I know the happy moments, the sad moments, and if you hire somebody else to do it, it's just like monotone.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And I do a lot of Audible, so I prefer.
Yeah, it's easy, man.
Just
like a podcast, man. You just hit play when you're driving and listen. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? That changed my book reading life because I've been a reader for a lot of years. I guess when I got sober, I started reading for pleasure, and I probably got through 2 to 4 books a year, and then with the introduction of Audible into my life, it started turning into a couple books a month.
Yeah, so here's the thing. Like for me, I've always had really difficult like reading comprehension, even as a child. Like just I would read a paragraph or read a couple pages and my mind would drift and I'd be like, what did I just read? And I would find myself having to go back pages just to figure it out. And then, but I'm a visual learner, so I can watch a movie a couple of times and have the whole movie memorized. And so
movie lines are a big deal in my life.
Yeah, and so, you know, I can listen to something and retain it almost 100% out of 100%. Like if I'm listening to something or I'm watching something, I can remember everything. If I read something, it takes me a while.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I appreciate that you read it yourself. Now, getting through the entire book, like you were just saying before we started, yeah, definitely an open book. I love the transparency. I think, how should I say this? In my estimation, one of my favorite things about you and the way you present, particularly in the book, it's authentic. It's you. You're not pulling any punches. You're like, hey, this is really where I came from. I'm right in the middle of David Goggins' book right now, and he's very similar. It's very raw. It's very heavy shit, to be honest.
Right.
And I just want to say thank you for that. I appreciate the honesty, the transparency, what we're talking about, the subject matter of your book, the subject matter of addiction, recovery, all things in between. It's gnarly, and we shouldn't be afraid to use genuine and authentic language to describe it because it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, you know, I couldn't imagine, like in all honesty, I couldn't imagine writing a book without it just being everything. And I think one of the life lessons that I learned with that was that I truly have no skeletons in my closet. Like I have none, like not one.
Right.
Not a single one. And it is the most freeing feeling knowing that you have no skeletons in your closet because you have no secrets anymore. And so to be able to put that out there and put it onto the public, there's like one of my favorite movies is 8 Mile with Eminem.
I was just thinking the same thing when he uses in the last battle.
It's the last battle, and that's like
he uses everything that they want to use against him, all of his weak points, all of his failure points. He turns into a rap, and he's like, "What are you going to say now?"
Yeah, and what did the guy have to say? He had nothing to say, not even a word. And you know, like I always like laugh because some people always like, "Man, you should run for politics. You're so just a truth speaker. You're super authentic. You call a spade a spade." And I laugh about it, but I'm like, God, if I ever did run for politics, I would sign my book and I would give it to my opponent. I was like, now go tell the world something that they don't already know about me. Like go do as many nasty political ads that you can, you know, like come, you know, bring it at me because, you know, and here's another life lesson, right? Is that what I would love people to know is that I go into the true nitty gritty of some of the things that I did, whether it be like at the darkest part of my life, you know, hanging out with people who worship Satan, right? And, you know, myself going and for about 6 months trying to get HIV just so I can live a free sexual lifestyle that I wanted to live with like no regrets, no nothing, no. And so like I put all that out there and the day before my book was supposed to be published, I had one last chance to go out and pull and edit anything that I wanted to, and immediately went into fear mode. So I started deleting sections of the book. Something happened overnight. I woke up the next morning and said, what are you doing? Put it all back in and let the chips fall where they may. Will certain doors be closed to me? Absolutely. Have they? Yes, they have. But the right doors have opened. And that's what led me back here to Arizona.
Any doors you could say?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I won't call the network out in particular.
But there have been networks that were like, hey, we don't really want your kind here.
I had a job offer to be one of the main anchors in Los Angeles, in my hometown. And then they found out I was writing the book and they pulled the offer. And
just on the basis that, hey, this guy's writing a book, he's going to talk, it's going to be, let it all hang out, talk about addiction
and that I was going to be, go around and speak publicly about it, at mental health summits. And they were just like, no, that can't be, one of the faces of our network. And that being said, fine. I'm glad that they did that, because had I taken that job and had they not said that at that time and found that out later, that would have killed my soul. It would have killed me, because I don't want my life just to be a news anchor. I'm not just a journalist. Like, that is a very small facet of my life. It's an important facet of my life, because I love sharing stories, and I love getting to know people and sharing their stories for other people to see and be inspired by. So I love that, but it's not my whole life, and so I'm grateful that that opportunity closed. And the life lesson that I learned in that, was I devastated? Yes. Did I cry for a week? Absolutely. That LA is my hometown, and to be able to get to that level, in this business is huge. But at the same time, I would have been miserable. And so speaking your truth, letting the chips fall where they may, will land you where you're supposed to be. And this is where I'm supposed to be right now.
That's good. I worked in marketing prior to getting into treatment. And by the very nature of what I did, I didn't interface with a lot of people, and I didn't really interface with the public, so there wasn't much of that. Occasionally, I would have an employee ask me, like, did I hear you say you don't drink? It would come up occasionally. And now, working in the treatment space, like, I let my tattoos show, I use the fuck word all the time, and it's like, whatever. It's nice to just be myself all the time. And I say all the time, it's not like, it's not like I've had to hide particularly, and I haven't lived a very public-facing life, all things told, not like you have. But in professional arenas, I've, for a long time, felt the need to edit and hold back and not really show, not being fake me, but being less than what I really am. And it's nice to be able to just be me all the time in professional setting.
I want people to feel that no matter what professional setting they're in, whether they're a news anchor, whether they're an attorney, whether they're CEO of a company, it doesn't matter. But I get it. I'm covered with tattoos, like honestly a character out of Prison Break. I'm body wrapped.
Are you wrapped? Legs?
I'm wrapped. No, not on my. I've just started on my legs, my knees, but like from the waist up, like you don't see regular skin.
Really?
Like I'm just covered.
Torso?
Everything. And
part of my stomach is done. God, I can only imagine if the whole thing were done.
It's a lot. It felt like somebody was taking a lighter to your skin and just holding it close and just a slow burn, especially when they're shading. That being said, but here's the thing: when I took this job in Arizona and I was interviewing, and this is going back about 8 years. They knew of my tattoos at Arizona's family. And I get it. They were just like, listen, if we do end up hiring you, like, we can't be showing your tattoos on TV. Right. Like we just can't. And I agreed to that.
And you're right to the line. Like mine are, you're right to the line where you can wear a collared shirt and...
I can. I tell people don't go as low as I did. I always tell people just go to your elbow. That way you can roll up a business shirt.
You could, yeah.
You
with
want
mine,
to be
I roll
able
them up and you can see them.
Yeah. So I always tell people ask me all the time. I'm like, don't be me. Like, don't make your job. Don't make it that much more challenging. We haven't got to the full acceptance of tattoos. There's still a stereotype out there.
Yeah.
Granted, I'm
not entirely sure what it is.
Slowly breaking it.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what it even means.
Well, I think it goes back to be quite honest with you, I think it just goes back to biker gangs. And I think that's the affiliation that people have with tattoos still in that generation.
You're a bad person. Something about the
you
fact
see tattoos, you're automatically bad. And like we haven't broken through that stigma yet.
I guess we haven't. And I'm so accustomed also, like, so I get sober. Like I had tattoos before I got sober, and then I got more tattoos in sobriety. And
Right.
my whole life has been inundated with people in recovery, people with active addiction, and then in the digital marketing world, I mean, a lot of guys that work on computers.
Well, it's
all
a
day.
creative space.
Right,
So
it's
right,
creative space.
it's
So
definitely.
I've always kind of lived in a place where tattoos were totally fine with everybody in my life.
Well, definitely not my profession.
No,
There's a lot of
no.
there's a lot of squares, and I get it. You're a
Yeah.
journalist, I mean, it's very straight and narrow. But what I will say this is that over the course of the 8 years, it is so interesting because my bosses, like I have the best relationship with my bosses. Like they're friends. From the general manager or station manager, all the executives, like we're true friends.
Sure.
And so because they've gotten to know me as a person rather than as a person interviewing for a job, they've come to me and they're just like, dude, you can show your tattoos, we don't care. Like we just don't care because they've gotten to know me as a person, and so they don't even see the tattoos when they think of me anymore. And so
Do you ever roll the sleeves up a little bit on camera?
there are times in the summertime if they do have me out on something like I have to, it can't be out in 115 degree heat, like wearing full long sleeves.
I don't really watch local news.
Yeah.
I guess I've seen enough of it to know that you're a local anchor, but I really don't watch it. I wouldn't watch it, seen it enough to know if you roll your sleeves up or not.
Yeah, a few people catch it. I mean, you could kind of sometimes on the desk see them peek out. But no, honestly, though, I can't even recall the last time I got a negative email about it.
Sure. That's an interesting thing. Why don't we talk about that for a minute? You get negative shit?
Oh my God,
Because you're pretty public facing, and the more visible you are, the more haters emerge. So you get some haters.
There's a lot.
First of all, let me
a lot of haters
tell you,
out there.
If you're out there and you're hating on Brandon Lee, from me, Estil Wallace, I said go fuck yourself.
Yeah,
What do
it's
people
crazy.
say?
It's really crazy. It does come with the territory. It does.
Sure, you're public-facing.
It's been tough this year. Because people in the news industry have been demonized from people at the very top of our
Sure.
at the top of our government, and we are not the enemy of the people. But believe it or not, people think I am. And so when they hear that from somebody that they trust and they believe, that Brandon Lee is the enemy of the people, well, eventually people are going to come at me, and tell me that, I'm the enemy, that everything that I'm doing is against this country and stuff like that. So I do, you do take a lot of beatings on a daily basis. I've gotten death threats over the last 6 months. And as somebody who does suffer from mental health, I'm not going to be cured from it, right? It's something I work on daily, but I'm grateful that I have the resources to have an amazing trauma therapist that every Monday for 2 hours, my therapy sessions run, that I'm able to talk through a lot of that, but I can't sit here and say that, getting a death threat or getting a threat to me doesn't throw me off. I mean, I definitely, about a month and a half ago, went into fight or flight after getting a threat while I was on the news.
It's hard for me to believe that a news anchor would get a death threat. That's really, first of all, that's bullshit, and I'm sorry that happens to you. I suppose, do other anchors talk about that? Have you heard that from other people in the space? I'm sure.
Well, I'm not unique. It's not unique to me, I will say
wouldn't
that.
imagine.
It's not unique to me. But when you get doxxed, and they put your home address, they put your cell phone number out on, these conspiracy theory websites. That's the level of where it's gotten, and just somebody speaking as a human, right? Just as somebody who is just a regular dude. I mean, to get that kind of a threat, it threw me. It definitely threw me, and I went into a really dark space. Even thought about using. I mean, when your brain gets hijacked, as somebody who does suffer from mental health, when your brain gets hijacked, it's already too late, and, it definitely did. My brain got hijacked for a good 24 hours, 48 hours, and it was definitely a scary time for me. Was starting to get violent shakes at night. Like if there was a camera watching me sleep, it would probably look like somebody was there performing an exorcism.
Right.
That's the kind of violent shakes that I was getting, but that's PTSD, that's a lot of trauma.
Well, if you want to, I can give you my opinion on journalism as well. But I think that the thing that separates places like America from other places is that we have freedom of speech.
Right.
This is a place where you and I should be able to share ideas, whether they're conflicting or whether they have harmony, and be able at the end of the day to still respect each other,
Right.
and live in the same place and share the same space and support the same community. It's the I believe that the polarization that's come, and I don't really think, I don't know if you want to hear me rant, here's what I think and I could be off base, and I would love to hear your opinion on this, but I believe the polarization in this country has a lot of factors, but I'm looking at a timeline of cable news being introduced and really being very ratings driven.
For sure.
Sort of picked two teams like the Red Sox and the Yankees.
For sure.
And with the birth and exploitation of social media, in this last 10, 12 years, has really taken what was already very divisive and really just thrown gas on the fire.
I agree.
And look, I'm a comment troll. I'll read people arguing about the new iPhone release. I don't give a fuck. I like to read some of that stuff. But the things I've read this year in particular, even on the fucking Nextdoor app, shit gets real, man. And it's like, what kind of a world has this become? And I don't know that people are any different. I think the information flow is just so much more aggressive.
I think there's a couple of factors that are playing into 2020 that are different. And I agree with you with, everybody should watch The Social Dilemma, and people should.
It was great, right?
Yeah, it was great. People need to, first off, the year of 2020, we had an election that nobody in our generation has ever witnessed. We've never witnessed something like this, okay? I don't care what side of the political aisle you're on. We've just never experienced something quite like this in our generation. Sure, politics gets ugly and they sling a lot of mud, but it was never to this level that I've experienced. And I've covered a lot of politics in my 22 years in journalism. So from that experience, I've never experienced something quite like this. That being said, we also have a pandemic, right? So you add that on. So everybody right now in the entire world, and especially in America, we are all operating in like fear, right? And
it's
so
crazy.
Everybody's in this high vibration. So nobody's down here. Everybody is operating up here.
Hypervigilant.
Everything. So everything goes into full-blown attack mode. And so until we're able to bring it back down to here, we'll never be able to have really good, informative, and constructive conversations. I think we all long for the day, like when we can just argue about a tax rate.
Seriously.
Right? Like those kinds of philosophies. But, we still have people in this country who think that being gay is a sin, that being gay or that gay marriage is going to be the destruction of society.
And I'm trying not to laugh too hard because to me that's so crazy.
That's the reason why there was such a diabolical shift with even gay marriage in America within a short amount of time in 8 years. I think it went from like 30% approval to like upwards of 75%.
Yeah.
Because people finally started to come out and say like, yeah, this is who I am and I'm gay.
Right.
And people were like, oh, Brandon's gay. Well, I love Brandon. He's a great guy.
I don't hate that guy.
Right. And so, and it's the same thing. And I apply that same thing to mental health, is that the more people like me who come forward and say, I suffer from anxiety, depression, PTSD, I was molested as a child, I got into heavy meth and GHB use and I got into all this stuff, but this is who I am today. The more people like me who come forward and they're like, oh, dude, Brandon, he's a recovered addict. Well, then hopefully that takes away a little bit of the stigma and the shame that they put on other people who are suffering from mental health.
Which is exactly why I want to do this. Exactly why I want to talk about this stuff. Because it is important, and our society is, particularly here, the one that we live in, is more volatile than it's been, at least in my lifetime.
Right.
And I'm assuming we're about the same age. I was a teenager in the 90s, and yeah, being gay was not cool.
No.
I'm straight, but regardless, the F word was used a lot.
A lot.
When I was, and I used it as well when I was 12, 13.
Right.
And it wasn't until I actually was maybe in high school, and I actually had friends that would let me know, like yeah, I'm gay. And I had the same experience. I was like, oh, well, I like you.
Right.
We've been buddies for 10 years.
For sure, but I think too, and I think the reason too is that we're living in this like black and white world where it's like either I'm all right and you're all wrong, and that's just not the way the world works.
100%.
But that's the way, especially this year, everybody is viewing everything.
Everybody's
like
a fucking guru on Instagram, and they've all got the answer.
Right, and it's like if you don't agree with me, you're my enemy.
Right.
Like if you don't have the same belief system that I do, suddenly there's something wrong with you, and that's just not the way the world works.
No, that type of groupthink is what's going to destroy our country.
Right. And the reason why, and I speak about this too, is the reason why there's so much, I will say this, the reason why just Congress in and of itself has such a low approval rating is because nobody likes hypocrisy, right? Like, I wouldn't put up with a friend of mine in my life who is a total hypocrite, who would say one thing but yet do another, only when it's expedient to them. And this isn't calling out one political party over the other, because it's on both sides.
It's politicians.
It's right. And so we won't accept that in our own lives. So that's the reason why it's like, why are we accepting this from these people? But we have to get out of this space where we demonize other people for just a different set of a viewpoint on an issue.
It's wild. And while I believe there's always been heated debate, and there's even been violent opposition, over the years, over the centuries, even in different countries and cultures, I would agree it's highly volatile right now, and I think social media has a lot to do with it.
For sure it does. And I'm a big believer of freedom of speech, of the fourth estate, being a journalist, I'm a big believer of that. But I also believe that with all of the platforms that are available out there, there has to be a level of responsibility. And right now, there's no accountability and there's no responsibility. And when you have that combination where somebody, any individual, has a platform to reach umpteen amount of people, and they don't have that same standard or level of responsibility placed on them, that creates a really dangerous environment. When people can anonymously go online, and cause real pain and harm.
There's so many trolls out there.
Right. But that, what that tells me though? There's a lot of hurt out there. You don't become a troll without some sort of trauma happening in your life. We're not born to hate.
No.
We're not born to do that. But I look at this, I'm like, my God, look how many people are suffering right now from mental health, that they feel the need to go out of their way and create an anonymous account to go after people.
Well, think about this. They have to create an anonymous account because they wouldn't dare say what they're about to say to the people they're about to say it to using their own identity.
Right.
And that's fucked up.
And that's the, I love social media and I love all the platforms that are available. But with that, again, without any accountability, this is what it creates.
It can help and harm in a big way. It's like fire. It's like it can be used like a weapon against people.
Right. And we hear these platitudes, when people are running for Congress, is that, there's so much more that connects us than truly divides us. There is truth to that.
Sure.
There really is. I hate that it comes from politicians' mouth because people look at them and are like, well, is that a lie? But even you and I guarantee you that if we got out a bunch of political viewpoints, we may not agree on a lot of stuff. We may not agree on government spending, we may not agree on certain things, but if we really start to connect about our own traumatic past and we start to connect each other as people, like that should be the bond that truly forms.
Well, and at the end of the day, absolutely, I agree 100%. And finding, look, you're a living, breathing human being living in the same geographical region that I am. Like, we have a shit ton more in common than we have in difference. Like, when we talk about the things that are dividing our country right now and the things that people are getting so upset about on social media, these things are policy differences. Sure, they're important. I'm not trying to say that what we're doing in the Supreme Court, what we're doing in Congress, what we're doing with the presidential candidates isn't a big deal. It is, but we still need to be neighbors next week and next month and next year. And I don't want to move, and I don't want, what scares me the most, I think, this is what I am afraid of and I don't want to happen, is for our country to become a war zone where skirmishes are normalized.
Right.
That scares the crap out of me. It's one thing for people to take shots at the left or to take shots at the right and memes and jokes and all those things, but if some of the things that people are saying online start to come to fruition, I mean, am I going to have to move my kids to another country?
Right. At some points, we can be a really weak people. And we just like to just cry and moan and bitch and complain, When you look, and if you go visit some third world countries where they don't even have shoes,
right,
and they are walking with buckets on their head to the nearest river for clean water, they don't complain. They don't bitch. They don't demonize.
No,
We
depression rate's a
live
lot
in
lower.
such a privileged society that we have gotten blinded by that privilege that we don't even appreciate what we have.
I agree 100%.
And until we appreciate what we have in our lives, we're going to continue to see chaos. And I saw you just apply that same thing to addicts. If you don't begin to appreciate the things and be grateful for the things that you have in your life, you are doomed to fail.
And isn't it interesting, if you can take a sponsee or a friend, anybody who's in recovery struggling, and they say they're bitching and moaning, and today's is the worst day ever, and say, hey,
Yeah, poor as me.
Text me 3 things you're grateful for.
Right.
And what happens every time? That's even just a few things that I can.
It's a mind shift.
It totally shifts. So we started off light. We got super serious. We just talked about some big, high-level shit, which is fun about these. I never know where we're going to go. I want to talk to you a little bit about, if you don't mind shifting gears, I want to talk to you a little bit about your experience. Now, you've got a book out there, so anybody can, if you haven't read the book, read the book, Mascara Boy, or listen to it. It was quite the journey. Blew me away. Thank you for doing it.
Yeah.
So I won't dig into like, hey, how'd you get here, all that.
Right.
I want to try and get into some stuff that maybe wasn't in the book that you haven't talked about a lot in your own podcast recently. So tell me about getting into journalism. What to you was interesting? When did you know you wanted to get into it? What was the draw?
Yeah, I'll never forget. It was in the 7th grade. Like we were a big news family, so we watched NBC Nightly News. Tom Brokaw was the anchor at the time.
Sure. I remember. Yeah.
So that was kind of a family ritual every night. And I just remember watching the news in the 7th grade, and I just pointed the TV and I looked at my parents and I said, that's what I want to do. You know, I mean, that's how clear it was. So I'm grateful that I was never one of those people that, you know, you go to college not sure what major to pick because you don't know what you want to do with life. Like I knew in 7th grade that's what I wanted to do. So I pursued it, you know, and I chased after it and chased after it really, really hard. And eventually got into NYU back in New York City. Sadly, like lived through 9/11 while living in Wall Street in Lower Manhattan.
God. And you talked about that a little bit in the book. What a nightmare.
Yeah, it was terrible. And that was something that it took me 16 years after that because I started to really heal from that in 2017. Because I never really looked at that as a traumatic experience, which blows my mind that I didn't see it through that prism. Because I saw things that I saw and smelled things that nobody should ever have to experience in their lives. And to not treat that and work through that trauma when it was happening was so detrimental to the road that I eventually went on. I mean, it just was like, you know, pouring gasoline on an already lit fire. Yeah. And that sent me more spiraling into my drug use and my numbing behavior in my 20s. You know, I will say that I used to be a work hard, play hard guy. So I was able to still maintain like working at NBC News as one of the youngest producers. I was a king of double life, you know, until we all know it all comes crashing down. But, you know, I was really, really good at living that double life. And it tricked my mind into thinking that I could have both. You know, I really did. But eventually it came crashing down. But yeah, that's how I knew. I always knew I wanted to be a journalist, and I still have that passion in me. Like I still get excited to go up to work. I still get excited to shoot stories and tell stories.
It's cool.
Yeah.
So you've been a journalist for 22 years. You've been sober for 10?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have years of recovery. So I've now stopped telling people my time.
Oh, okay.
I have a philosophy behind it.
Let's hear it.
I'm a big believer in that in the traditional 12-step recovery, when people go around the rooms and they raise your hands, how much time do you have? Da, 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 da. You follow me here. I believe that creates a sense of shame within the rooms of AA.
Okay.
Right? It creates this fake hierarchy within the rooms of AA that those with 20 plus years or those with 15 years or those who have more years than you are more wiser and have more wisdom than you and have their more lives together than you. That's what that sets up.
They're better people is what
right,
they are.
Right. Oh, how much time do you have? 5 years? Oh, I have 15, right? There's a natural puffing of the chest that I'm more of an authoritative figure. Listen to what I have to say. Right.
People are absolutely susceptible to that.
Right. So I was a big AA circuit speaker, was flown around to all these AA conventions around the country. And after I would speak, I would have guys come up to me and say, hey man, would you be my sponsor? And and at that time I'd say, okay, well tell me about yourself. And they'd have 30 plus years. Well, at that time I had like 8. And so I was like, wait a second, I have 8 years, you have 30 years. Why are you asking me to be your sponsor? Shouldn't it be flipped the other way around? Like if years mean something, if the amount of time means something, then shouldn't it be flipped? Why are you? My life's a mess. So you mean to tell me that that's what I have to look forward to, is counting my days and counting my years, and at year 30, my life can be a mess? So the life lesson that I took away from that was, it doesn't fucking matter. Judge me by the man I am today. Listen to this podcast, listen to me, and see if I have experience, strength, and hope. And that's all that should matter. It shouldn't matter if I tell you I have 11 years for you to believe me that I have wisdom or wise words to say. You shouldn't trust me any better. What if I were to tell you I had 5 years? What if I were to tell you I relapsed? You're going to look at me any different? You're going to tell me I got to go back? The other thing why I believe the way I do about no longer counting my time is that because when somebody relapses in traditional 12-step models, what do? Go back to day 1. Well, I remember what I was like on day 1. And even if you relapse, you're not where you were on day 1. You don't lose all that experience, strength, and hope that you had up until the time that you relapsed. For example, if you're in a master's program, master's programs can be really difficult, right? You're juggling multiple things. You're juggling family, you're juggling kids, you're juggling school, and you're juggling your professional life. Well, let's just say you're in your 3rd year, and life gets crazy, and you can't manage the class, and you fail. Does the dean of students come to you and say, you need to start back at class 1 in your master's program?
Kindergarten.
No, you don't, because you don't lose that experience and that knowledge that you've gained over the time. You take the course over and you continue on your road. If in a marathon, which I have run, the New York City Marathon, I cramped up on mile marker number 17, pulled off to the side, did not think I was going to finish that race. The race official, one of the officials, comes over to me and goes, what can we do? Are you cramping? Okay, da, da, da. And I started like crying because I'm like, I'm not going to make my time. I trained so hard, I'm not going to make my time. Race official looks at me and goes, are you trying to win it? And I'm like, huh? They're like, because the person who won the race, who won the New York City Marathon, finished about 2 hours ago. And so the race official goes, we're going to get some electrolytes in you. Started massaging my legs, got up, and she goes, walk the rest of the way. Finished the race. They did not tell me, dude, you tripped and fell. You need to go back to mile marker number 1 and rerun your race. You don't lose the experience that you have. The issue that I have with that is when somebody relapses, they have so much shame that sometimes they won't even go back to a 12-step room because they don't want to raise their hand and start back at day 1.
It's true.
We should look at that person who relapses and say, okay, you relapsed. Of course you did. It's a pandemic. You're isolating. We went through a shitty political year. Of course you relapsed. Okay. You have a day of dark time. You have a week of dark time. Let's get you back on the road and let's continue on.
Well, I appreciate your answers and your viewpoint. I'm still a big 12-step guy, and my view has been, whenever there's things that I don't agree with within the fellowship, sort of norms that have kind of taken shape and dynamically changed over the years.
Sure.
As I've stayed sober, I've sort of made it my business to be the change I want to see within those rooms,
right,
as often as I can. So while I still count I'm still very attached to my sobriety date.
Right.
I'm not.
I know my sobriety date.
Right. I'm not big about like, hey, I have more time than you or something like that. It's I would say my conversations with people that relapse are very similar to what you just described, because there's a lot of shame around. Oh, even sponsees, they'll say, oh, I don't want to disappoint you. Like, it's not about disappointing me. Fish swim and the sky's blue and alcoholics drink. We're working on getting a big enough shift within you so that you never have to drink again. That's what we're working at. It's not about some number. I had somebody when I was pretty new, when I was caught up on the whole time thing. I mean, like in my first year, I had somebody ask me, they were like, what does the person with the most sobriety when they die win? And I was like, I don't know. He's like, nothing. It's not about that. It's not about how much time. In my view, I look at it the same way I look at any type of practice, whether it's meditation, yoga, weight training. God, you had some interesting stuff about weight training too. We should talk about. But any of those things, it's not the time in and of itself. Because you're right. I've sponsored men with more time than me, and thought the same thing when they asked me. I thought, that's odd. But it's really about the dynamics of where you're at now. Like you said, where am I at today? Listen to me. Like if what I have today is attractive, then let's talk. I'm happy to share with you what I'm doing.
Right.
And I may not always be good at it. I may fuck this up at some point.
But why is it in recovery? When we meet somebody in recovery, hi, what's your name? My name is Brandon. How much time do you have is the second.
It can be.
It is. 9 out of 10 times, it is the second follow-up question when you meet another addict. When an addict meets another addict, what's your name? How much time do you have in sobriety? Because we are immediately judging that person by those two things, by that second thing.
Interesting. So when I meet a newcomer, I'm pretty quick to ask somebody who appears to be new, to ask them how much time they have so that I can encourage them.
Right. There's a benefit. Now, listen, I get it. I get it, and I will give credence to that I see one plus side to sharing with somebody how much time you have is just to show the newcomer that, yes, you can string together a lot of time in sobriety. And It is possible. Of course it's possible.
And there's a sweet spot. I think 1 to 3 years does that.
Right. Right. Okay, so yes, it is possible. But
10 plus is almost too much.
But we size people up. Whether we do it subconsciously, whether we want to admit it or not, we are sizing you up by that second question of how much time do you have in sobriety? Because we are judging you based on where we were at that time in recovery.
And it's not the same.
It's not the same.
They're not the same.
No. So and here's the other thing. Why is, if we believe that this is a disease, okay? If we're of the belief that alcoholism and addiction is based in disease, right? Why then do we treat addicts
third leading cause of death in the United States.
So differently from other diseases. Whereas with people who are sick with other diseases, we bring them balloons, we bring them flowers, we make sure we check in on them and make sure that they're doing okay, even if they make a mistake. Mm-hmm. Why is it with mental health and addiction and drug addiction and alcoholism, somebody makes a mistake and we demonize them? Mm-hmm. Why?
I don't know.
Why?
And I'm hoping that the people like you speaking up.
Well, that leads me to the next thing, which is when I started going, when my book came out, and I was on MSNBC and CNN and talking about mental health, I had old-timers.
Which, thank you, by the way.
Thank you. Well, I had old-timers putting me on blast from AA. You are violating the 11th tradition. How dare you talk about this? How dare you talk about this? Mm-hmm. Okay, first off, this is my story. This is my recovery. If you got an issue with it, looks like you got something to go talk to your sponsor about today, first off. Secondly, is that what was explained to me was that the reason why they believe in the anonymity part is because if I tell people that I got sober in AA and I relapse, it will look bad on the program. What I say to you is that you are putting more belief into a program than you are in the image. You're putting the importance of a program above the needs of an individual. Second, is that I believe that if we remove the anonymity part, for those who are willing, we will see that CEOs, pharmacists, corporate attorneys, news anchors,
politicians, doctors,
are all addicts. Mm-hmm. What does that do? It helps normalize it and takes away some of the stigma around it. But until we have these successful people in their lives through recovery come out and talk about it, we will continue to have a societal stigma against addicts who are homeless, fuck-ups, mess-ups, people who don't have passion about anything in life. Those will be the stigmas that still exist when it comes to mental health.
Can I use that as like the intro to this podcast,
you know
like every
saying?
episode?
So I get it. There are some people who choose to be anonymous because it's usually out of fear. If their bosses were to know that they're an alcoholic, that they would be discriminated against. They might lose their job. Well, fucking man, that is the exact stigma that we are trying to remove.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly it. So here's my take on the whole thing. I don't claim membership to any particular 12-step fellowship. I never have, at least not publicly. I'm familiar with it. I've dropped into lots of meetings over the years and had service commitments and
Yeah.
have a sponsor, and I do sponsor people. So
Right.
I probably belong to some 12-step group out there, but I wouldn't say.
Right.
So that way, it's kind of like me wearing the mask, even if there might not be a need to. It's me doing my part to say, you know what, I'm not going to violate the 11th tradition, although people have sweated me already, even just for doing this.
Oh, doing a podcast, trust me, they sweated all over me. And I'm like, I'm no longer a member of the program. But when somebody asks me a question.
That's an easy one. I'm no longer a member. So
I no longer count myself as a member. But here's the thing. Here is the thing. There are 101 different ways to get sober and stay sober. And the one thing I took away from that program, it's a designed for living. And I've designed a living for me that works in my life, that is working for me. And so what I tell people too is that, right, there are umpteen ways to get sober, but the anonymity part to me is that's the thing that I'm trying to break through. If we can break through the anonymity part, we can help remove the stigma when it comes to mental health.
Mm-hmm.
What I was going to say is when somebody asks me, how did you get sober? You asked me when I came into your office, right? Mm-hmm. Hey, where'd you get sober? How'd you get sober? Where'd you get sober at? I never went to treatment. When somebody asks me that question, I'm going to be honest, okay? I went to an AA meeting when I got released from the hospital, right? I went to an AA meeting.
Which is probably the exact advice somebody gave you.
Right, so somebody said, well, you should say you went to a 12-step meeting. No, motherfucker, I went to an AA meeting. You're gonna ask me a question about my life and my sobriety. I'm going to be honest with you about where I did. So I went to an AA meeting that was held at his church in Hollywood on Melrose and Mansfield. And I've been, and I got sober on that day and been sober ever since. So don't put me on blast for saying that. Where'd you get sober?
People need a reason to be angry.
So here's the other thing too, is they don't like to talk about the efficacy rate. Nobody likes to really talk about the efficacy rate, because if we did talk about the real numbers.
It's changed. The Cochrane report was just released early in 2020. They've changed their whole tune. They used to say 6%. Now they're saying it's 22 to 37%.
Right.
By joining a 12-step program.
Right. But here's what I say, is that number good enough to you?
Right.
So, is that good enough? Because you tell me, if I took a test and I got 36% on my test, that's a failing rate.
Right. So, and you and I talked about this briefly when we spoke on the phone. So I believe in using everything we've got.
For sure.
Right.
Multi-pronged approach to recovery.
Yeah. And this, here, let me give you one little one-liner here, or it's not really quite a one-liner, but everyone who's got a one-liner, like on social media, and I was thinking about the COVID crisis, this pandemic, everybody's got, from whatever side, whatever angle they're coming from, they're all saying, if everybody would just do this, it would be over. And it's like, maybe. This is really complicated. Everyone having an answer to what's going on in politics in a one-liner, or to what the pandemic, or to addiction, is pretty short-sighted. It's just so fucking complicated. None of us has all the answers. And I think there's a real beauty and harmony and ability for us to work together when we can all say, listen, this is crazy, this is complex, and let's work at it with everything we've got. So prayer's not off the table.
Right.
Brain scans aren't off the table.
Right.
Good old-fashioned Jungian therapy is not off the table.
Right.
Let's use whatever we can to try and get at what's eating Gilbert Grape.
Correct. And here's the thing, is there are so many advancements in science. I mean, I believe in neuroplasticity. I believe that we can rewire the brain.
We do. That's what we do.
That's what we do. And that's why I always say treatment is so important, that I feel like if and I'm an ambassador now, and I work now in treatment, down at Sabino Recovery, The reason why is I believe in that kind of science because of multi-pronged approach, EMDR, equine therapy, neuroplasticity and brain mapping, regular talk therapy. It's and gut therapy, like diet. If you're not healthy here, you're not healthy here.
Yep.
Right? It is a fucking multi-pronged approach in order to having somebody feel better and really laying the foundation to an amazing life, which is why I truly believe people should go to at least 35-day treatment, just to get some sort of an semblance of a foundation, followed up by 12 steps.
Yeah.
Because and I want your viewers to know, I'm not anti-12-step. Holy shit, I apply 12 steps every day in my life.
Right.
Right? I'm just not going to buy into 100% any particular program and
Sure.
try to match what my needs are to that program, right? I'm taking bits and pieces from different aspects along the way to create a program that works for me.
100%. And I think I think a well-balanced life is inclusive of a lot of different practices and disciplines, right? Because I go to the gym and lift weights doesn't mean I'm going to be a competitive bodybuilder.
Right.
Because I go to 12-step meetings doesn't necessarily mean that I have to do all things in a dogmatic in the 12-step dogmatic fashion.
Right.
There are a lot of guys that I have a strong affection for and have a deep respect for, who have really built their life within that framework, and it hasn't grown beyond that. And that's okay. I'm not here to judge them, but when I look at my own life, here's an example. I was like a year sober. Had a service commitment at the area level, so I'm like an alternate GSR or something, right?
Yeah.
Big deal. Now I've got a clipboard and
Yeah.
I've got a thing. So I'm in this group of people that all are 10 plus that I have enormous respect for. And what I noticed when I looked around the room was everyone was morbidly obese. And I was on my way. At a year of sobriety, I had the sobriety belly going pretty well.
Yeah.
And I had this little aha moment. I was like, I need something that I'm not getting here.
Right.
I don't know how to eat right, and I don't know how to exercise because I'd never
Right.
lifted weights before. And I had my first moment where I was like, here's one thing that I have a question about that I'm not
Right.
going to find the answer to here, at least not very easily.
Right.
I'm going to have to step out. And I'm glad I did. It was an eye-opening experience. And there are people that I looked up to in the recovery rooms when I was new that over time, you know, when your heroes become people, there's a disillusionment process that happens. And that's, I think, surviving that type of disillusionment
For sure.
leads to maturity. So I get to be like, you know what, those are just people. And I don't have to be mad that they aren't these superhuman, patron saints that I thought they were.
For sure. And, a couple things on that. It's such a great topic is that, first off, I will say that I have 2 former sponsors who don't even follow me on social media anymore. Because of the trajectory where I've taken my recovery.
Sure.
They don't agree with my podcast. They don't agree with my book. They don't agree with how public I've been about recovery. These are my former sponsors in recovery who were disappointed in how I've chosen to live my life in recovery. Okay. Okay. So there's a lot of, I felt the same way too, in that the reason why I think treatment is so important in the first, when somebody does decide to make that true diabolical shift in their life to change their life, so why treatment is so important is because I am truly of the belief that 9 times out of 10, addiction is rooted in some sort of trauma and traumatic experience.
Very often it is.
Okay, rarely is it just somebody that has the perfect childhood in life. They grew up in a great family.
To your point, we do ACE testing at Cornerstone. We do ACE testing as part of the intake assessments, and I mean, most people are 4 and up.
Okay, right. So
I'm an 8.
Right. So that being said, right. So I'm sitting there like 7 years into just 6 meetings a week for 7 years. So I got experience in 12 steps. Okay, like I did it. But at some point, it wasn't enough for me. Mm-hmm. I'm like, why am I still choosing sex to cope? Mm-hmm. Why am I still a sex addict? Why am I still doing some of these other things? And so it finally got me into intense trauma therapy.
I'm glad you did.
Right. So now I look at my life with the experience of just 12-stepping for 7 years, or, like just doing 12 steps for 7 years.
It got you sober.
Right. Got me
you
sober. It did. I always say it got me a good foundation, but it wasn't enough, which is why it's, right?
Absolutely.
AA plus what? AA plus what?
Right.
Like you want efficacy, you want this, you want that. But we are dealing, we're dealing with so much more than alcohol, and a few pain pills. We are dealing with hardcore opiates. We're dealing with heroin. We're dealing with meth. We're dealing in injectables. Something back in the 1920s and 30s they weren't really thinking about, right? So a program that was based for alcoholism, right? Alcohol has a different attack to the brain than opiates do. Mm-hmm. That's based in science. It attaches to our receptors differently. So we have to be able to look at those substances and say, and choose a design for living, because there's a reason, Estil, that when I was in CMA rooms, I never saw anybody raise their hand with more than 2 years. Go into AA rooms, 25, 30, 50 fucking plus years. It has a different impact on the body and the brain. Mm-hmm. So I look at CMA rooms. The 12-step model for hardcore drug use is not enough.
I think each person, it's going to be their own mix of what the plus is.
Right.
But I'm totally a believer in 12-step plus. For me, it's 12-step plus diet plus gym to a healthy degree.
Correct.
Plus therapy.
Correct.
Right. Plus family systems work.
Right.
And to give the founding fathers of the 12-step world credit, they attempted to make mention several places in the original text
To get help.
Like we
when
don't
you
have
need
all
it.
the answers here.
Correct.
And I think the contention comes where people forget that they were always trying to suggest that they didn't have a monopoly on this.
Correct.
And I think modern fellowships, by and large, have sort of adopted the viewpoint that we do have a monopoly on this. This is the only way.
Right. No, you're very, very true. You're absolutely right.
And it's like, and it's just like the political things we were just talking about. Like, it's not one or the other.
No.
God fucking damn it. Like,
No.
Can I be cool with gay marriage and low taxes?
Right.
Can I be
Yeah.
cool? Can I be cool
Right.
with 12 steps and not think that I have to make everybody in AA or CA happy?
Right.
Like, can I balance that? I think we can. I don't think there's any rules to it. There's only norms, social norms, right?
Yeah.
And our own prejudices, and we can be the change that we want to see.
And just like I say, some of the most judgmental people happen inside of a church. Some of the most judgmental people in recovery happen inside 12-step rooms.
Sure, of course.
It just does.
Of course.
Right? In a place where we try to preach judgment-free zone, there is so much judgment.
We're still people. And the thing
Correct.
about 12-step, even any you're talking refuge, any recovery rooms,
Mm-hmm.
we're still dealing with people that are internally
Right.
very dysfunctional and
Correct.
on the mend, so to speak.
And you know what's also interesting that doesn't get talked about a lot is sponsorship. Mm-hmm. Okay, like I'm a huge believer of sponsorship. I think it's really important to our everyday lives just to help people. I look at more like sponsorship rather than just being there for somebody, right? Because like you don't have to be necessarily a sponsor in order to help somebody else out,
Sure.
right? Like I look at my podcast, and I look at different ways when people reach out to me after reading my book or hearing a podcast and I get into a conversation with them and talk to them, and trying
Absolutely.
to help them, right? I look at that as sponsorship, and just being there for somebody. That being said, a sponsor is not your fucking therapist. Mm-mm. And you should not go to your damn sponsor for anything more than, how did you do it?
Right.
And we need to draw the line right there. Because I have witnessed some really bad advice being given by sponsors claiming authority because they got 20 plus years in recovery. So sponsors are not therapists.
Nope.
Go to an expert when we talking about some real serious stuff. Also, what does not get talked about a lot, in the gay rooms of recovery. Right. If you go to a regular 12-step meeting,
Which I'm not in a ton. Occasionally I get asked to go down to Lambda and I'll
right,
I'll
and
pitch.
speak or something.
But
Okay.
I mean a few times.
But here's the interesting dichotomy. Okay. In regular 12-step rooms, you have to have a guy as your sponsor, right?
Generally, it would be frowned upon to do it any other way.
Correct. You don't go to a woman asking a woman to be your sponsor.
It's not.
You
it's
don't
not
do that
common at all.
right.
It happens, but it's very rare.
It's rare because they don't like you doing it.
Yeah.
Because of the conflicts of sex. Right?
And romance.
Okay, sex and romance. Well, what happens in gay rooms? Gay guys sponsor other gay guys. There's a lot of 13-stepping that happens. It got so uncomfortable for me personally.
Yeah.
So when I was in the gay rooms in Atlanta, Georgia, when I was really first getting sober, like I got sober in LA, moved to Atlanta, 60 days clean.
How'd you like living in Atlanta?
I loved it. It's one of my favorite
Cool city?
cities. One of my favorite
I was
cities
only there
anywhere.
once for 5 days.
Fucking
and
love
I
Atlanta.
enjoyed
Like
when I was
freaking
there.
love it.
Cool.
So when I was in Lambda there, in the gay rooms, I chose a lesbian as my sponsor.
I like it.
Right, because I was like, no.
I'm not trying to fuck you. You're not trying to fuck me.
Correct.
Intentions are very clear here.
The intentions are good. What she witnessed because she would be going to the gay rooms too, and that was just naturally like very few lesbians in the rooms, a majority of gay guys, just even population, right? There's more gay,
Yeah.
right, you get it.
It's like 5 to 1 men to women.
Something
in
like that.
recovery.
So it's just, yeah, right?
4
They're
to
even
1,
that
5
much
to 1.
more of a minority, right? So, but they would come. So I chose her as my sponsor. She was fantastic.
You mentioned her in the book.
Yes. She, CC in the book, she witnessed guys grabbing me, grabbing my butt, smacking me on the butt. She'd see guys come in for, when you go to hug somebody before
AA
COVID, AA hugs, right? But then the hugs would turn into a kiss on the lips.
Dude.
She witnessed that. And she goes, Brandon, for the first time, I see why you're so uncomfortable in these rooms. Go to straight meetings. So I eventually just went to straight meetings.
How was the shift?
It was really, really good. But you know what bothered me there was I was no longer, getting touched upon in ways that made me feel uncomfortable.
Sure.
But I witnessed guys do it to women. Like in the straight rooms, like I would watch a woman and I could feel her uncomfortableness because I was uncomfortable. I know that look, I know that feel. Mm-hmm. And so
people are creepers.
Yeah.
12-step meetings for sure.
Yeah, and it nobody really talks about this stuff.
I'm glad we're talking about it.
Because
I've been going to men's meetings my whole recovery.
Right. And
I go to straight men's meetings.
Right.
And it just doesn't leave a lot. The meetings I've been going to for so long don't leave a lot of room for that kind of stuff
right.
to go down.
And it's really important to me, right?
And I'm spoiled. I'm spoiled by it.
Right.
When you tell these stories, that makes perfect sense to me, but I'm like, fuck, I'm glad that wasn't happening to me when I was 30 days sober.
Correct.
Jesus.
And so, here's the other this is the reality. This isn't Brandon hating on groups again. This is just a reality that we all need to reckon with, is that we also have judges sending convicted sex offenders as part of their treatment program to AA meetings. Well, we also have young women who are 30 days, 40 days sober, and we're mixing people in. We just have to be very careful about harming somebody who is newly sober in the setup of these rooms. There was a recovery center. I'm not going to call them out, but I had 2 sponsees at this recovery center, newly sober, who were having sex with girls in the parking lot during the co-ed dances that they would have at the recovery center. I went to the damn director and I was like, why are you having co-ed dances? Like, just why? Oh, it's for the social engagement. I got 2 sponsees who are screwing girls out in the parking lot.
They're socially engaging right now.
Right. Is that necessary? 30 days, 60 days sober, we expect people to make all the right choices. No, they're not going to make the right choices for that. And so we just have to be conscious about how we're all doing this to make it a safe space for people.
It's difficult. You brought up, there was a story you told in the book about a sex offender, a pedophile that had confided in you. And
I've had 4.
Wow.
I've had 4 child molesters tell me that they were actively molesting kids.
And this puts you in such a precarious situation because on one hand, being somebody in a 12-step scenario, you might be the only person on the planet that they would be willing to divulge that to. And on the other side of that coin, I mean, you got to fucking do something. And I heard you in the book, you talked about do I, don't I? And obviously you went to take action.
I did.
And I would too, and I would always, 100% of the time, encourage anyone to take that kind of action. There's...
I got heat for it.
Yeah, that's fine.
By old timers in the rooms.
That's fine. Hey, old timers, I said go fuck yourself.
Yeah, I did. When I called
I've been sober a long time. You can look me up. I'm in.
When I got a phone call, when I had a sponsee tell me that he was actively raping his girlfriend's 7-year-old daughter, I absolutely called the police.
Yeah, that's the one that you talked about in the book.
I
cried when I heard it.
Yeah, and I had 3 other guys in my time in 12-step rooms tell me that they were molesting boys. I'm not a therapist.
No.
I am a I'm a rape survivor. I'm a child rape survivor myself.
Right.
Whether that made somebody feel like I would have empathy for a child molester is beyond me. I don't. But I absolutely got authorities involved in the case each and every time and will continue to do so if I know that any fucking child is ever being harmed.
I commend you for it 100%, and I would do the same thing. There's a subset of people out there, pedophiles, that are trying to attach their name to the LGBTQ acronym. How do you feel about that?
Okay, that's the first time I've heard about that.
Oh,
so
really?
Explain.
Google it. So if you Google
Just,
it,
yeah, explain.
If you Google it, there are people out there, in fact, preaching this from universities. In fact, university professors touting that that pedophilia is a sexual orientation.
Okay, that is the first time I've ever heard about that.
Yeah, there's a TED Talk on it.
Okay, I'm gonna watch that TED Talk. I'm gonna refrain from making an opinion until I
You can
read
text
something.
me. You can text me what you think after you watch
when
it.
I want to read some things in full context before I give a
Please
true
do.
opinion. But on surface level,
doesn't make any sense to me.
on surface level, no. Like
Children are by definition unable to make
choices.
They're children.
No.
They're under the age of 18.
Yeah, no, I'm
not talking about a
I need to see how this is
17-year-old
being
with an
written or
18-year-old
what is being
boyfriend.
talked about. No.
Yeah, we're not
this
talking about a
is insane.
17-year-old with an 18-year-old boyfriend.
It's not an orientation.
No. It's in almost every culture on the planet. It's a crime. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
Right.
It doesn't mean it's not a thing. But it's an abuse thing.
Right.
People scream at each other. People hit each other, and people fuck around with kids. It's a horrible part of life, and it's a reality of life. But it doesn't make it okay, and it doesn't need to be normalized.
No, certainly
any more than
doesn't.
any other kind of abuse needs to be normalized.
Never.
No. So I commend you.
Full stop.
Never full stop. Yeah, when I read it, when I heard that part in the book, I thought, good for you, man. Because here's another thing that's interesting that maybe some people don't know. The 12-step world can sometimes be a catch-all for a lot of different types of people that come through.
A lot.
And on one side of the coin, I mean, really, where that guy needs to go, if you're coming from a place of love, tolerance, is if you don't know that they're doing anything actively, and they're saying, hey, I've had this in my past, like, hey, man, you need to go. There's another fellowship out there. There's SAA, there's SLA, there's sex-oriented 12-step groups that you could join that are specifically for this version of spiritual sickness that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
And I would definitely opt for healing where there's that type of trauma to be healed, because this, like most things, is based in trauma. I don't believe anyone has a healthy childhood and then decides in their 30s that they're going to start raping kids.
No.
I don't think it happens that way.
It doesn't happen that way.
No. So there's a part of me, the compassionate part of me, wants to find a way, if there is one, to help heal those souls before they go on to repeat complete the chain and keep it going.
Right, and I will always say, though, a part of recovery is taking full accountability for your actions, and that even goes by the weight of the law.
Yes, 100%.
You don't get a pass just because you're in AA or just because you're in a
fucking
12-step group. Yeah. No, I don't care. No matter what you did, you committed a crime, you will take full responsibility of that fucking crime.
Yeah.
And recovery will take care of itself.
Yes.
But that is part of recovery. You don't get to
100%.
just get sober and not take accountability for the crimes you've committed. You will be accountable for every one of those crimes you've done.
Yeah, I agree. And I've had plenty of friends, at least 3 or 4, that have gotten sober, did great for a year or 2, and ended up having to go back and do time.
Yeah.
And those guys stayed sober.
Exactly.
They stayed sober. They
Right.
came out and they were like, all right, now
part of
that's
your recovery.
Now prison's part of my story.
Right. It is part of your recovery. It's part of your journey that you have to walk through.
So in my view, what the unrest that lies at the heart of addiction or these types of compulsive behavioral things is a separation between actions and values. I'm not the person I want to be, whatever that means to me. And shoring that up is how recovery comes into play. I become the person that I imagine I could be, would be, should be, would like to be. And until that can happen, like, are there shades of that? Sure. Do people constantly try to find the minimum amount of change to get the maximum amount of benefit? Absolutely. A lot of people do that. They try to do the minimum amount of work and get the maximum amount of benefit. But ultimately, it's when people Surrender,
Right.
holy. So you know what? I'm gonna take the fucking hard way this time, man.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go the hard way. I'm gonna tell the truth. I'm gonna face up to the things I've done wrong, and I'm gonna do my best to be better. Those are the people that stay sober.
Yeah, and I think that, I think the reason why I've been able to manage, so much time in recovery and sobriety is because when I first got sober, I did a very, very, very thorough first time for 4-step. I was very, very thorough. I didn't skip over anything. And I think that is a huge, if you really ask people, and I always made it a point that, after somebody relapsed and they did come back to a 12-step meeting, and I would always ask them, like, tell me what it was like. Because I fantasize about it. So tell me what it's like. I'd be lying to you.
Tell me it's less awesome than it is in my mind.
Right. But I mean, like, every addict fantasizes about using. To act like you don't, you're a fucking liar.
Sure.
Like, to sit
I still
there
dream about it occasionally.
Right. We do. Okay, it's part of life. We just don't put as much weight in it. I used to be like, oh my God, I had a using dream. And I'll never forget. My sponsor goes, dude, how was it? I was like, no, I fucking liked it. Like, I was having a good time in my fucking dream and that's scaring me. And he goes, dude, you got a freebie, man.
Yeah.
And it was just took the weight off of it. That being said, I asked people, like, okay, well, what happened? Like, what started? And for the most of the time, it's either like they got halfway through a 4-step, they didn't do a thorough 4-step, or they just didn't commit fully and honestly from the very beginning, which is why sometimes you do see a lot of people 4 or 5 times in treatment. And I've interviewed people with 15 times in treatment. Asking, well, what was different about the last time compared to the other 14 times? And usually it comes back to a level of honesty and surrendering, a full surrender. And what I tell people is, like, when you really wave the white flag, when you really wave it, your chances of getting and staying sober are so much higher. Like, I got 5 emails yesterday from parents of children who are addicts being like, Brandon, like, we don't have money, blah, 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 where do we go? Like, how do we get my son into treatment? And this one woman said, my son's living with me, he's in his mid-20s, he's abusing drugs, and I'm so scared, da da da.
Sure.
And I told her, and I said, well, unless he's ready, you need to go to Al-Anon. And I said, because I said, just from the brief email description, you are contributing to a lot of enabling behavior. I said, any parent who has a child who's 26, 27 years old, and they're using drugs in your house, did you know that the majority of child overdose deaths happen in the family home? Because mom and dad are giving them a safe place to live, they're paying your rent, and what are they doing? They're using drugs under your roof. That's enabling behavior.
Yeah, they have no consequences.
With none. So, what I tell people.
A couple nights out on the street's perfect for Junior. That's what he needs.
That's it, right? It's getting you to your rock bottom. It's getting them to, and that's the hardest bond to break, is getting a parent to realize by cutting your child off, you're actually saving their lives, you're not actually sending them to their death. Like, I know that is so reverse, like, philosophy towards animalistic behavior from a parent to a child.
It's hard to internalize that, but it's the truth.
But it is the God's honest truth, that if you have a child who is abusing drugs and you are allowing them to live in your house, you are sending them to their grave faster than if you were to cut them off. You are. We're trying to get them to reach that level of desperation so that they're waving the white flag on themselves, and that mom and dad aren't waving the white flag for their child.
I'm really glad you brought this up and we're talking about it, and I hope that our listeners can gain value from this. I spoke with a mom a while back. She started blowing me up. Hey, it's a kid that I know. Hey, he's living in my house. He's getting high. What do? I said, you want direct advice? And she said, yeah. I said, kick him out. She said, well, what if he dies? And I said, you're not going to like this, but he's probably going to die in your house.
Right.
Here's the thing, you keeping him under your roof doesn't change his probability or likelihood of death or survival.
Right.
In fact, it probably increases the likelihood of his death.
Right.
If you cut him loose, is it going to be cold out there? Sure. Are you going to be scared? 100%. Do I envy the position you're in right now? Not at all, and I might be there one day.
Right.
I hope that I'm not, but I might be.
Right.
I sure as hell put my parents in that position.
Yeah, I mean, enabling behavior it's real.
Yeah.
If you're a parent paying for your child's cell phone because you want to be able to connect with them, just realize you're paying that bill so that he or she can call their drug dealer. Okay. And it's sad, I mean, it's sad because you never want to see that heartbreak from a parent.
I can only imagine. I have little kids. I can only imagine.
What that's like, to see somebody, because a parent's going to sit there and go, no, I'm going to do everything that I can to save my child's life. And I get that. And part of that effort is by letting them go. it is by letting them go, which is a really difficult thing, but it's important, which is why I tell each one of them, like, it's going to be a very fruitless endeavor unless they wave the white flag themselves.
Yeah. My mom used to call the cops on me for sleeping in the backyard.
Right.
And when she died 6 years ago, God, it's almost 7 years. When I held her hands and I was kissing her face, I was very fortunate. I was fortunate, lucky, whatever you want to say, to be there at the moment that she left this life. And in that moment, I thanked her. And I said, I'm sorry for putting you into horrible positions, and I thank you for making the hard choices and the tough choices, and you made all the right ones. And I told her how much I loved her, and I thanked her. I thanked her for doing that.
Right.
And I feel very incredibly fortunate I was able to do that with her. But God, as I think about that, like, in the moment, it was raining. One particular morning that I remember, it happened more than once, but the one that in my mind, it was raining. It was like February, so it was cold-ish. It's Arizona, cold.
Yeah.
And she's screaming at me through the window with the phone in her hand.
Right.
And I remember just being annoyed and resentful. I remember thinking, what the fuck does she care if I sleep on the patio?
Right.
While it's raining. She doesn't give me any money. She doesn't help me in any way. The fuck does she care that I can't just sleep here? And it wasn't until I got into recovery till I looked back at that and thought, fuck, man, how could I do that? How could I put her in that position? To feel threatened in her own home.
Right.
To feel that she had to call the cops to get me to leave. And how helpless she had to feel. The only thing she could do is call the cops. That's the only thing she could do to help her son. It's horrible.
It is horrible, and but that just goes to show you that when we are active in our disease, how selfish we are and how selfish our thinking is.
And I was beyond, just like anyone who suffers with addiction, beyond power. I was beyond aid. Human aid, that is, and I didn't have the skills necessary, and I was very much caught up in the cycle of addiction. And that's why I think it's so important to talk about it, because addiction is a disease. It's the third leading cause of death in America.
Yeah.
Accidental death by overdose.
100%.
You gave me a little thumbs up on Instagram, a little thing I posted from Vice, where we were talking about isolation being detrimental to people with mental health and addiction.
For sure.
What do you think's going to happen once the coronavirus is put to bed, whether it's 6 months from now or 2 years from now? When we look back on 2020, what do you think the consensus is going to be about isolating people?
With the consensus on isolating people, God. Well, we always tell people that isolation, anybody new into sobriety or shit, just anybody who suffers from mental health, because I have years of recovery, and I definitely hit my wit's end during isolation as well. I don't have family, I don't have kids, I don't have a spouse, so I'm alone. And I know what it did to me with the experience that I have, right? So I can only imagine for somebody new into recovery. I knew right away, as a news anchor, when I was telling isolation stay-at-home orders, that there was going to be a lot of death and relapse, and it's come to fruition. There has been a lot, which is also the reason why I think we all need to show grace to those who have relapsed during a pandemic, and to not make them start over at day one and count their chips all over again. And I will say that to the moon and back. I will say that at an AA meeting when I speak. Because we need to show grace, we need to show a level of compassion. I think one thing I will look back at this time is that we suck at compassion in this country. We suck at empathy. We suck at being able to see life through the lens of somebody else. And I hope that that is one thing that we're able to do going forward. Because I think if we could, I think that if we didn't demonize people as much as we do, there wouldn't be to the level that we have. Listen, that being said, was I happy to see AA meetings close down? No. Because I know what a Zoom meeting is like, and I also know what a being there in person is like, and it's different. Would I tell everybody to wear a mask at the meeting? Yeah, I would tell everybody to wear a fucking mask at the meeting.
Sure.
But if you need to go to a meeting, I would be all in favor for a group of 20 people to meet in an AA room so that people don't isolate and that people don't have to be alone. But I think that we can do two things at once. I think we can also take...
Walk and chew gum.
Right.
Yeah.
Again, it's going to a black and white mold. It's I think you can be able to be responsible, but I also think that you could be also responsible by wearing a mask and by taking some other safety precautions, right? Why can't we do both things?
We can totally do 12-step meetings outside.
Right.
sit 6 feet apart. That's not that complicated.
Right. So I think that I would look back at this time. I would never like to see AA meetings shut down. I would never like to see any 12-step meetings shut down ever. I think that there's always a way around it, and I think that we need to get more creative than Zoom meetings to be able to get people to congregate together. Because if that's the only connection that somebody who suffers from mental health is going to have during stay-at-home orders and during isolation is going to that one meeting a day where they actually get to see and be with people, we need to be able to do that.
Yeah. And without necessarily having all the answers, I think struggling and finding ways to do that is what's important. Because we got to keep it. We got to keep connection.
We have to keep connection because, right, the opposite of addiction is connection. The opposite of addiction is connection. Because when we're when we're addicts, we isolate. When we're addicts, we withdraw. We're not social. We don't like to socialize. But connection is what takes us out of that and gives us purpose and gives us meaning into our lives.
It gives us accountability. It gives us fellowship,
connection
laughter.
Is all that, right?
Yes.
So the opposite of his addiction is connection, which is why we always have to be able to still find a way to connect with people in a responsible way.
Sure.
I really have to go, though.
Then we're done. We'll wrap it up. We won't go off the deep end. A real honor and a pleasure to have you here. If you haven't read Mascara Boy, get Mascara Boy. It's excellent. Our boy here is on the nightly news on AZ Family.
Yeah, AZ Family, 3TV, and CBS 5.
Awesome. Real pleasure to have you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, man. Always
so
good
much.
to have a conversation.
Yes, thank you so much for everything today.
Yeah, absolutely.